The Dungeons of Srirangapatna Fort, Srirangapatna, India. Presented by Holidays on Shoestrings. Dungeons always sent a shiver down my spine, and these two in Srirangapatna Fort were no different. Where there is a fort, there usually are dungeons, except that these days we rarely get to see any. Which is why, when we heard of the presence of two dungeons in Srirangapatna, we were all agog with anticipation. The word dungeon is sort of morbid, and one imagines this place to be where prisoners are put to much suffering in dark and dreary cells. As the story unfolded, it was becoming clear that this was actually true. Thomas Inman's dungeon used to be a hidden prison inside the fort. This secret cellar was discovered by an engineer called Thomas Inman about 100 years after the fall of the fort. Proof of the clever design of the dungeon that even today it is difficult to locate. Colonel Bailey's dungeon, which is the more popular one, is made of mortar and brick. The vaulted dungeon with thick walls is below the ground level and measures 30.5 meters long and 12.2 meters wide. What I found so odd was that this was the first ever I heard of a jail named not after the one who ordered its making, but after the one who was kept there, which happened to be Colonel Bailey, giving it his name, Colonel Bailey's Dungeon. It was not out of turn in those days for the British to hold Indian officers and locals as prisoners of war. But it certainly was big news when the British were held prisoners. Tipu Sultan was one such valiant fighter who had the courage to hold highly ranked British officers captive. It was hard to see anything inside the dungeon. It is eerie, yet the way the dungeon was built is appealing. The dungeon has a low roof with a series of arches resting on huge pillars dividing the interior into bays. My thought as I walked through it was that Tipu had not compromised on the style of the architecture even here. The arches were symmetric, had the shape of a masjid's tomb, bulbous on the sides and converging at the ceiling. Our imagination ran wild at the thought of all the British soldiers chained to the walls, chained by the wrists to stone slabs with stone hooks fixed on its walls. The dungeons were periodically flooded by the waters of the mighty Kaveri River. The prisoners had to stand in waist-high water. The water was often dirty and infected, and further, they had to put up with leeches that stuck on the fatigued body in the dark dungeon that was far removed from the outside world. Another thing that is quite odd is the presence of an at least 750 kg wrought iron cannon placed right in the middle of the jail, and no written proof describing the reason behind the presence of that cannon here. Two different legends have sprung up. One, which to me sounded like an exaggeration, is that whenever a prisoner was found useless and there was no use of keeping him chained further, he was blown away using this cannon. A big hole right above the cannon pointed to as proof. The other explanation for its presence here is that when there was a military blockade at Srirangapatna, the heavy cannon rolled back and under its own weight made a hole in the ceiling. At last, fell into the dungeon, which became its permanent resting place. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and tell your friends about it.